For over 70 years, they were known only as unknown. Hundreds of American service members, killed in the fiery chaos of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, lay in anonymous graves. Their families were left with a lifetime of questions. Today, we're exploring the remarkable story of how cutting-edge science is finally breaking that silence, echoing through history to give these fallen heroes back their names. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a swift, devastating blow. In less than 2 hours, 403 Americans were dead. The USS Arizona was obliterated by a catastrophic explosion, taking 177 of its crew with it. The USS Oklahoma, struck by multiple torpedoes, capsized, trapping hundreds of men inside. In the immediate aftermath, a grim and chaotic scene unfolded. Recovery efforts began at once, with brave sailors and civilians retrieving the dead from the fiery, oil-slicked waters. Navy diver Ken Hartle, tasked with recovering bodies, rarely spoke of his traumatic duty, only saying the hardest part was bringing up our boys. The sheer scale of the casualties overwhelmed the military's resources. Many recovered remains were severely burned or fragmented, making visual identification impossible. In the absence of established protocols for such a mass casualty event on American soil, the initial identification efforts were fraught with challenges. In the years following the attack, a major effort was undertaken. In 1947, the remains of hundreds of Pearl Harbor casualties were disinterred from temporary cemeteries and transferred to a central identification lab. Using the forensic techniques of the time, primarily dental records, the laboratory staff managed to identify some of the men. However, for hundreds of others, identification proved impossible. These service members were buried as unknowns in 46 plots at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, also known as the Punch Bowl, in Honolulu. For decades, their headstones bore only that stark inscription. Then came a revolution. The discovery of DNA analysis in the 1980s by Sir Alec Jeffreys offered a powerful new tool. The key to finally giving names to the unknowns of Pearl Harbor is a method called mitochondrial DNA analysis. Unlike nuclear DNA, which you inherit from both parents, mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, is passed down exclusively from mother to child. This maternal lineage makes it an invaluable tool for linking remains to living relatives, even those separated by several generations. Furthermore, mtDNA is far more abundant in cells than nuclear DNA, increasing the chances of obtaining a viable sample from old or degraded bone fragments. The process involves comparing the mtDNA sequence from the remains to a reference sample provided by the families of the missing service members. A match can provide a strong link to a maternal relative. Modern advancements like next-generation sequencing have made this process even more powerful, allowing for the analysis of even the most degraded samples. At the heart of this mission is the Defense POW/MIA Accounting Agency, or DPAA. Its sole mission is to provide the fullest possible accounting for missing personnel to their families and the nation. The agency operates the largest forensic anthropology laboratory in the world, employing a large team of historians, forensic anthropologists, archaeologists, and other specialists. Their work is a meticulous, multidisciplinary puzzle. Historians and analysts comb through historical records, creating a case file for each missing service member. Genealogists then work to trace family lines to find living relatives who can provide DNA reference samples. Once remains are exhumed, forensic anthropologists examine the skeletons to create a biological profile, including the individual's age, sex, and stature. Forensic odontologists compare dental remains to records. Finally, the DNA analysis is conducted by the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory. An identification is only made when all lines of evidence are in perfect agreement. The story of identifying the Pearl Harbor fallen is in many ways the story of the USS Oklahoma. The battleship suffered the second highest number of casualties, with 429 sailors and Marines killed. In the years after the war, only 35 were identified, leaving 394 buried as unknowns. For decades, their families lived with a painful void. But the tireless efforts of a Pearl Harbor survivor, Ray Emery, set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Emery spent years researching the Oklahoma casualties, convinced that modern science could identify the unknowns. In 2003, he persuaded the military to exhume a single casket from the punch bowl. The results were staggering. Instead of 5 individuals, the casket contained the commingled remains of nearly 100 men. This discovery revealed the immense challenge, but it also demonstrated the potential of DNA analysis. This success provided the impetus for a much larger project. In 2015, the Deputy Secretary of Defense authorized the disinterment of all the remaining USS Oklahoma unknowns. This marked the official start of the USS Oklahoma project, a massive undertaking by the DPAA. The project was a monumental challenge. The remains were highly commingled, meaning the bones of multiple individuals were mixed together. Over 13,000 bones had to be sorted and analyzed. More than 5,000 DNA samples were taken and sent for analysis. Despite the challenges, the USS Oklahoma project has been a resounding success. As of its conclusion in 2021, the DPAA had identified 361 of the 394 unknown service members from the ship, a success rate of over 90%. Behind every identification is a story of a life cut short and a family left to grieve. The work of the DPAA has brought closure to hundreds of families. Among the identified were the Trapp brothers, Harold and William. The 2 Navy sailors were aboard the USS Oklahoma when it capsized. For 80 years, their family wondered about their fate. Thanks to the project, their remains were identified, and in June 2021, they were buried with full military honors. Their niece, Carol Sowar, called the identification a miracle. Twin brothers Leo and Rudolph Blitz also perished on the USS Oklahoma. They had enlisted in the Navy together in 1938 at the age of 16. In 2019, their remains were identified through a combination of dental records and DNA analysis from a family member. The family of Herbert Jackson, another sailor killed on the USS Oklahoma, also received the news they had long awaited. His nephew recalled how his grandmother, Herbert's mother, never gave up hope that her son might still be alive. In 2019, they received the call that Herbert had been identified. The success of the USS Oklahoma project has served as a model for identifying other Pearl Harbor unknowns. The DPAA has also been working to identify the remains of service members from the USS West Virginia and the USS California. The USS West Virginia lost 106 crewmen, with 35 buried as unknowns. In 2017, these remains were disinterred. As of June 2022, 13 have been identified and returned to their families, including electrician's mate, 3rd Class Charles Brown, who was 22 when he died. The USS California lost 104 crewmen, with 25 buried as unknowns. These remains were exhumed in 2018. Since then, a number of sailors have been identified, including Fireman 1st Class Edward Bowden. In March 2024, it was announced that the remains of Mess Attendant 3rd Class David Walker had been identified through DNA. While the DPAA has been focused on these ships, a new effort has emerged to identify the fallen from the vessel that suffered the greatest loss, the USS Arizona. While the majority of the 177 men who died on the Arizona remain entombed in the sunken battleship, the remains of at least 85 crew members were recovered, but never identified. They are buried as unknowns in the punch bowl. This effort, called USS Arizona Operation 85, is being led not by the government, but by a dedicated civilian. Kevin Klein, the great-nephew of Robert Klein, a sailor who died on the Arizona, founded the project. He was frustrated by the military's reluctance to take on the difficult project and decided to do it himself. Funding the effort, and working with volunteers to track down family members and collect DNA samples. As of late 2023, they had made significant progress toward the DNA representation required to begin an official identification project. The story of the identification of the Pearl Harbor fallen is one of science, perseverance, and a nation's commitment to honoring its heroes. For decades, families lived with the pain of not knowing. Now, thanks to the tireless work of the DPAA and the power of DNA, those families are finally receiving answers. The identification of each service member is more than just a scientific achievement. It is the fulfillment of a sacred promise to leave no one behind. The echoes of Pearl Harbor will never completely fade, but with each name that is restored to an unknown hero, a measure of peace is brought to the families, and a new chapter is written in the story of that fateful day. The work is not yet finished, but the commitment to honoring the fallen remains as strong as ever.